All right. In this video, I'm going to be talking about Donald Super, Linda Gottfredson, and their models of career development, as well as a few other small models that can apply to career development. So that's kind of the video for today. So Donald Super and Linda Gottfredson were two theorists who started to depart from the standard like trait and factor theories of career development. So they started to think more holistically and think bigger about, okay, what goes into like the process of life and career decision making, and life and career that decisions that impact one another. uh, so I'm going to start with Super. So Super talks about lots of different concepts, but three main ones kind of are going to be the emphasis of this video. So talking about the lifespan approach, so how we develop throughout time and how that impacts career development, as well as life spaces, or the life roles that we play and how those kind of shift throughout time as well. And then he also talked about the idea of self-concept. So those are a few principles that we're going to be talking about. So I'm going to share my screen and share something called the life career rainbow that, excuse me, that Super developed. All right. Okay. So this model here, the life career rainbow, this has to do with especially the lifespan. So we'll start there. So Super talked about how throughout the lifespan, there's different tasks. So basically from 0 to 5 to 10-ish, individuals are growing. We're growing in our identity. We're growing in who we are. We're growing in our awareness of the world. We're growing in our biological, cognitive, emotional development, social development. So we're just kind of growing in some of these key tasks. And I'll talk a little bit about childhood career development in a moment. But ultimately, it's not career development for children just to be like, we're not taking them on occupational interviews and signing them up for internships, obviously, but some of these key tasks are occurring of just like how we go about learning and developing and choosing, kind of who we are and how, and other external influences on that as well. And then we get to this exploration to where, okay, we've kind of grown in some core aspects of who we are. Now we're starting to explore potential identities, like career identities to take on. So that's kind of in those teen years, and into like the young adulthood. That exploration is continuing to occur. And then, mid 20s to 40s ish is this establishment. So becoming established in a career identity, kind of finding a home, a career home. And then there's this maintenance of kind of this forward progression, or maybe moving up in promotions and further maintaining that identity throughout time. And then there's this disengagement stage near the end of life, from 65 to the end, of disengaging from a specific career identity role. And it doesn't say it here, but it's also re-engaging in identities that are meaningful after paid employment. So finding a way to kind of live out the remaining years well. So this is the first time that someone had presented the idea that the lifespan perspective matters in career development, that it's not just about choosing an interest or a personality and going with it, but there's tasks throughout time. And then that takes us to the life spaces, or the life roles. So Super came up with several important life roles that seem to be pretty consistent for a lot of people, but these are not obviously an exhaustive list. There can be a lot more here. But he talked about the child role, student role, or just learner role, the leisureiter, those like hobbies, the citizen, being a worker and being a homemaker, so owning a home and maintaining a home. And once again, there's always going to be exceptions to the lifespan and to these roles. There's always going to be exceptions, but you just kind of view it as this overarching that many people seem to develop in these spaces. Uh, so as you can kind of see here with the coloring, so the child role is primary in those first several years of life. That's why it fills up this whole child segment. Then it starts to go down, and the student role starts to take over around like that 5 to 6 when children start school. So they're maintaining this child role as well as the student role. Then sometimes starting to develop more of these leisures and these hobbies, and those roles are all occurring at the same time. That then goes into a citizen and a worker. So we're navigating all these different life roles at the same time, and they all impact each other. So obviously, if something's occurring in your work, that can impact your relationship with family. That can impact your home life if you get laid off from a job. So I think that starts to add the complexity of what the various life roles bring to the table. And I don't have an image for this one, but just the idea of the self concept. I think self concept is a really important principle in this as well. That so Super talked about how self concept are how individuals view themselves and their situation, and that's from the Scharf text on page 178. So there's this idea of identity, of knowing who we are, how we view ourselves, who we want to be, how we are kind of defining ourselves. And that plays into which life spaces, which life roles we prioritize and how we prioritize them. It impacts how we show up throughout the lifespan. Uh, so once again, I actually use this super model with clients when I was a career counselor at the University of Wyoming. I would present kind of at like intake basically, and the informed consent process. After informed consent, I'd say, here's what career counseling can sometimes look like for people. Sometimes people need to work on their self-concept of who they are and how they make sense of themselves and what's important to them, their values, their personality, their interests. So, but also sometimes it's important to talk about, what life roles are you taking on right now? Maybe sometimes there's a conflict between who you want to be as a learner, what major you want to follow, versus your child role, navigating your relationship with your parents, or any other factor, or maybe you're working part-time and you're struggling to show up for your studies, and that's impacting your ability to like figure out your career path because you're stretched too thin between your roles. So some students need to work on that. And then sometimes we'd focus on this lifespan that like, okay, maybe you're at this exploration place and you're starting to, or maybe you're still needing to grow in who you are. So they just basically, I just kind of present these concepts to them and say, okay, did anything there resonate for you, or any area that you feel that we need to work on in career counseling together? And then they'd usually let me know. So that's one idea of how to like explicitly use a theory, just to like kind of present ideas to a client at the start, and then let them kind of choose how to take things, the direction to take. So I want to circle back really quick, actually, to childhood career development, because I think sometimes we think that, especially for school counseling folks, that's super important. Like the career focus is really important for all school counselors, but I think sometimes we don't understand, like, wait, what does that even mean? Like, how are we, reinforcing career development with children, especially at like an elementary school setting? But Super talked about how, career is more than just like career information, and like it has to do with some of the key tasks for childhood that impact career decision making or decision making down the road. Or curiosity. Is the child curious? What are they curious about? Fostering that curiosity. So helping them find, what do I care about? What kind of motivates me? What's energizing to me? And kids naturally gravitate towards that. So it's like, how can, as a school counselor, can we foster that? And also, that's kind of the next step is exploration, fostering exploration. And it doesn't have to be like, hey, we need to go look into this career. It could just be like, what are your interests, and how can we foster that exploration of those interests? And then this is where it starts to get a bit more, career focused. But like, how can we help the child get more information? How can they get information about just the world around them? And that's also the inner information too. But they start to, like, kids at a young age are starting to glean in the career information about from their key figures, which leads to, the next step that's talked about in the Scharf text is key figures. There's these key developmental figures who kids use as like models to follow after, or kind of they're observing these key figures, like they're often parents or teachers or just other, adult figures, usually adult figures, or even I guess older siblings, that are these key figures. So how can they learn from them, and how can we kind of foster that growth through those key figures? And kids are also working through internal and external control, so they're trying to find internal control. How can I like develop this self-control? But also kids that are in the school system have this external control of these rules that they're trying to live, or that they're tasked to follow in the school system. So sometimes these are externally imposed, but then the hope is that they become like an internal self-regulatory, control for them. So that's an important, career task, is figuring out self-control and how can I like maintain myself. All of this is going to hopefully lead to the development of interests. And so anyways, I guess one thing that I want to add is one quick example. Like, so for so we homeschool our kids, and there's a few kids that were like friends that were homeschooling as well, and I actually use this. So I have some play therapy background, and I set up 6 stations based on the Ryeset codes. So realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprising, conventional from Holland's theory of types. And I created play stations, you know, not the gaming console, stations of play based on those interests. So for artistic, there'd be like paint, there'd be, you know, drawing, etc. For, you know, realistic, there were like kid-based like hammers and like kid like play saws, stuff like that, to work with their hands. For the social, there might be just like stuff that kids can wear, like a nursing or a doctor coat, and they can like pretend and play throughout that role. So I showed the kids each of the stations, then I just let them play to hopefully let them be curious, to explore, to try out the interest, to see where they navigate, which play areas did they naturally gravitate towards. So it's almost like starting to get an idea of where their interests might be, or just like ultimately just letting them be kids and be curious, but also letting them kind of become more aware of what's around them. You know, so anyways, it's kind of an interesting thing to see. So that might be something applicable to some of the school counseling folks as well. So just a few last principles from Super. I think maybe the main one that I want to emphasize is Super talked about this idea of career maturity, that hopefully career development work is leading to a place where clients find a sense of maturity in their career. And this usually involves like that they have career planning that's deeper than just being superficial or just being, you know, a received career plan, but it's like an internally based career plan process. And they also know how to explore careers genuinely. So that leads to career maturity as well. Is like, okay, I need to explore, and how can I do that in a meaningful way that's beyond just like a Google search? Uh, and then they come to this place where they know how to make career decisions, and that can look different for each person, but uh, they come to this place of more maturity when it's like, okay, I'm not floundering and lost when I need to make a career decision. Like I know some steps that I can follow. That might include like networking. That might include like occupational interviews or job shadowing. They know how to explore in meaningful ways and how to make these decisions based on that exploration process. And they know how to seek out information and knowledge in meaningful ways as well. And an important last concept is this idea of realism, that they can accurately like self-assess and self-assess the environment, not self-assess, but I guess assess the environments around them, the career environments, to see, is there a real chance, like an honest chance, that this could be a good fit? And they're not like deluding themselves into thinking they're, you know, either worse in their abilities than they really are or better, but there's an accurate depiction of who they are. So anyways, those are several concepts from Super that are talked about in chapters 7 through 9 of the Scharf text. But just to wrap up this video, I'm going to talk about Gottfredson, Linda Gottfredson, and Linda had some connections with Donald Super in a lot of the stuff that they talked about. But where I want to start actually is, let's see, on page 185 of the Scharf text. I really like the language that Scharf uses here, and that comes from Gottfredson, is talking about how basically it's a theory of self-creation. You know, so career planning isn't just about a career, it's about the self and figuring out and creating and figuring out who we are and who we want to be. And on the page it talks about how there's, on 185, it talks about how Gottfredson explains that the individual enters a very complex world with a simple and incomplete cognitive map of the world. So yeah, that starts like to be incomplete, but we're developing this cognitive map of the world, especially in the world of work. And part of the task of career counseling or counseling-based career work is, let's see here, is helping clients navigate that map. And let's see, and helping them find their internal compass. That's part of the language that let's talk about. So developing, or to navigate this cognitive map, people develop an ever-growing internal compass that guides them as they make choices in their daily lives, and is developed by the many choices they make each day. so that they have this internal compass. So I think that's just kind of an interesting metaphor of the compass and the map of a lot of career development work is recognizing, okay, maybe I'm lost and I need to find a map, and I need to have this internal compass that helps me find the direction, like helps me find my bearings. As well as like, yeah, there's always going to be these social influences on that internal compass too. So being able to make sense of that. All right. With that being said, let's go. So two major principles from Gottfredson's model is circumscription and compromise. So circumscription has to do with, on page 187, it says the process by which young people eliminate occupational alternatives that do not fit their self-concept. So basically, it's like this funnel that there's lots of occupations out there, but throughout time, there's this eliminating process of possibilities for the career path. So people are naturally just kind of sorting out what doesn't fit. So that's kind of the circumscription process. Okay, that doesn't fit. Eliminating those alternatives. And on pages 187 through 189, Gottfredson it references Gottfredson's the stages that, at a young age, kids are starting to reject certain possibilities based on their size and perceived sense of power. So maybe it's like, I'm small, so I can't do these hard, big tasks. Maybe like working in construction, like I'm always told, no, I can't do that. No, I can't do that. It's too hard. I'm not allowed to even try it out. So I eliminate that because I'm too powerless to do that. There's also stage 2 from ages 6 to about 8 is what Gottfredson suggested. There's an orientation to sex roles. So assuming the gender dichotomy is like there's certain female professions and certain male professions. Maybe this isn't even spoken, but it's observed that like certain professions are just for females, certain professions are just for males. So based on genders, kids might start to eliminate possibilities. And then stage 3, from ages 9 to 13, there's this orientation to social valuation. So it starts to get into, okay, kids start to develop this awareness that like, okay, there are social influences. They might notice that they're aware of social class. They're aware that their friends' parents have more money. And maybe it's because they start to become aware that like, oh, they're a doctor. They've done more schooling, or they've done more training so that they can make more money. So, and kids might start to get an idea of like, okay, so what class is my family, and what's the culture of our family, of what professions are within our grasp. So for example, my dad he was a plumber, and my grandpa was a plumber as well. But my dad specifically ingrained it in us: do not follow this path, do not follow this path, do not follow this path. But I have like this kind of blue collar background. But the messages of pushing against that, so it's almost like this social valuation process from my father saying, this career role isn't as valuable, don't pursue it. And honestly, I kind of like working, in the plumbing and like construction stuff that I've found like later in my life, more recently, and I probably could have done just fine and been okay in that. But from that influence of his social valuation, I think it kind of helped, or it kind of directed and influenced me. Then I guess I'll jump back to the last stage here that Gottfredson addresses on page 189 of the Scharf text, of an orientation to the internal unique self. So obviously there's all these influences on the child, but we start to get this idea of like, okay, who am I internally though? How do I sort through these social messages, these gender role messages, these size and power, processes from earlier on, and how do I start to kind of figure out and funnel down who am I and who do I want to be? So all of these are basically funneling down. All of these stages are processes of circumscription. But then Gottfredson also talks about compromise. That we get to this point where maybe we've funneled and we've excluded a lot of possibilities, but it's decision-making time. So then we might have to be like, okay, maybe all of the possibilities that I see within my grasp, like my most ideal options, maybe they're out of reach for whatever reason. Maybe I don't want to get, do all of the education for it. Maybe, it feels too hard at this point, whatever it is. We might start to, what's the word? Yeah, so in the text it talks about on page 189, when it becomes close to decision-making time, such as graduation, individuals are more willing to lower their aspirations. So they're willing to compromise and kind of settle. uh, for possibilities. I kind of see it a little bit different as well. That maybe it's that so circumscription, we've been eliminating possibilities, and maybe unconsciously, but maybe part of compromise and is it like an openness, opening back up of the funnel to say, okay, maybe there are more possibilities. Maybe that more possibilities that I previously sifted out that might be a good fit. So that compromise can be almost like a settling back into things that I've previously rejected as I start to learn more about myself and my self concept. So I'll pause it. I'll pause at that point and create another video about several other smaller models that can influence career development. But those are some of the key points from Donald Super and Linda Gottfredson's models. And happy to see your comments and get your questions and work with you in anything that you got from this video. So thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you again in another one.